Marcus Rivers stood on the sidewalk, coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips, watching a bulldozer tear through the front wall of his grandmother's house. The house where he'd spent every summer as a child. The house he'd inherited 3 months ago. The house that was supposed to be his fresh start. "Stop," he screamed, running toward the demolition crew. "Stop! This is my property." The operator of the bulldozer either couldn't hear him over the roar of machinery or chose to ignore him. Another chunk of the century-old brick facade crumbled to the ground, taking with it the hand-carved window frames his great-grandfather had installed in 1923. A stocky man in a hard hat approached, clipboard in hand. "Sir, you need to step back. This is a construction zone." "Construction zone?" Marcus's voice cracked with disbelief. "This is my house. I live here." The foreman glanced at his clipboard, then back at Marcus with the patience of someone who dealt with confused neighbors before. "Says here this property was condemned last month. Owner failed to respond to multiple notices. City ordered demolition." "I am the owner." Marcus fumbled for his phone, hands shaking as he scrolled through emails. "Look, here's my deed. Here's my insurance policy. I've been renovating this place for weeks." The destruction continued behind them. The bulldozer was now attacking the kitchen where Marcus had shared countless meals with his grandmother, where she taught him to make her famous tres leches cake, where just yesterday he'd installed new cabinet handles. "Sir, I don't know what to tell you. We got our orders from the city. Property at 847 Maple Street was supposed to be cleared today." The foreman showed him the work order. "That's this address, right?" Marcus stared at the paper, his mind racing. Something was very wrong here. He'd been in contact with the city planning office just 2 weeks ago about his renovation permits. Mrs. Chan at the permit desk had been helpful, encouraging even. She told him how wonderful it was to see young people restoring the old neighborhood. "There has to be a mistake," Marcus said, but even as the words left his mouth, a cold realization was settling in his stomach. This wasn't a mistake. This was too convenient, too perfectly timed. Just last month, Richard Blackstone had knocked on his door with an offer to buy the property. "Cash deal," Blackstone had said with his practiced smile. "I can close in 2 weeks. This old place is more trouble than it's worth, son. Take my advice." Marcus had declined politely. The house wasn't for sale. It was his connection to his grandmother, to his family history. It was going to be his home. Blackstone hadn't taken the rejection well. "You'll regret this decision," he'd said, his friendly demeanor evaporating. "This neighborhood is changing, and you can either be part of the solution or get bulldozed with the problem." At the time, Marcus had thought it was just developer bluster. Now, watching his dining room collapse in a cloud of dust and broken dreams, he understood it had been a promise. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Sorry about your house. My offer still stands, though you might want to adjust your expectations. Lot prices are much lower than house prices. RB." Marcus screenshot the message, his jaw clenching. Richard Blackstone had made one critical error. He'd underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. Marcus River hadn't just inherited his grandmother's house. He'd inherited her fighting spirit, her connections in this tight-knit community, and most importantly, her detailed records of every shady dealing that had ever happened on Maple Street. The bulldozer could destroy his house, but it had just built his resolve. Payback time was about to begin. 2 days after watching his grandmother's house reduced to splinters and dust, Marcus sat in the cramped office of legal aid attorney Sarah Martinez, a cardboard box of documents at his feet. The smell of old paper and determination filled the small space. "This is unusual," Sarah said, flipping through city records. "Very unusual. The condemnation notice was filed the same day you applied for renovation permits. Almost like someone was watching for your application." Marcus leaned forward. "Can you prove it?" "Proving it and fighting it are two different things. The demolition is done." But she pulled out a manila folder. "I've been tracking Richard Blackstone's development projects for 3 years. This is his 7th emergency demolition in the historic district. Always properties that owners refuse to sell." The pieces were falling into place. Marcus opened his grandmother's wooden recipe box, now one of the few things he'd salvaged from the ruins. Hidden beneath index cards covered in her handwriting was a leather journal he'd never seen before. "What's that?" Sarah asked. Marcus opened it carefully. His grandmother's meticulous handwriting filled every page dating back 15 years. Property sales, city council meetings, zoning changes. She'd been documenting everything. "My grandmother wasn't just a retired teacher," Marcus said, reading her notes. "She was the neighborhood watchdog." One entry made his blood run cold. R. Blackstone offered Mrs. Patterson $50,000 for her corner lot. She refused. 2 weeks later, city inspector found structural issues. House condemned. Patterson forced to sell for $15,000 to cover demolition costs. Blackstone bought lot for $20,000. Page after page revealed the same pattern. Elderly homeowners pressured to sell. Those who refused faced mysterious code violations, tax assessment errors, or sudden condemnation notices, always followed by Blackstone swooping in to buy the cleared lots at a fraction of their value. "He's been systematically stealing this neighborhood," Marcus whispered. Sarah was taking notes furiously. "Your grandmother documented everything. Dates, names, amounts. This is evidence of a criminal enterprise." Marcus flipped to the most recent entries. His grandmother had been investigating Blackstone right up until her death. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before she passed, made his hands shake. "Blackstone has someone inside City Hall. All our appeals get buried. Someone in the planning office is his inside man. Must find out who before they come for Marcus's inheritance." She'd known they would target him next. Marcus pulled out his phone and called the city planning office. "Hi, Mrs. Shen. This is Marcus Rivera. I need to ask you about my renovation permits." "Oh, Marcus. I'm so sorry about what happened to your house. Such a terrible mix-up." "Mix-up?" Marcus put the call on speaker so Sarah could hear. "Mrs. Shen, I need you to be honest with me. Who processed the condemnation order for my property?" There was a long pause. I can't really discuss internal procedures. "Mrs. Shen, my grandmother thought very highly of you. She mentioned you in her journal. Said you were one of the good ones at City Hall." Another pause, then her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Meet me at Rosario's Diner on 5th Street at 6 p.m. Come alone." That evening, Mrs. Shen slid into the booth across from Marcus, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by nervous glances toward the door. "Your grandmother was right to trust you," she said quietly. "But she was wrong about me being one of the good ones. I've been too scared to be good." She pulled out a flash drive. "Everything's on here. Blackstone has been paying Deputy Planning Director Thompson for 3 years. Thompson fast-tracks condemnation orders, buries appeals, makes problems disappear. I kept copies of everything because I knew someday it would go too far." Marcus stared at the small device. "Why now? Why are you helping me?" Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. "Because your grandmother came to see me the week before she died. She knew something was wrong with the tax assessment on your house. She begged me to watch out for you, to protect the property. I promised her I would." She wiped her eyes. "I failed her. I let them destroy your house because I was afraid of losing my job, but I can't fail her memory too." Marcus pocketed the flash drive. For the first time since the demolition, he smiled. "Mrs. Chen," he said, "you just gave me everything I need to bring it all down." Richard Blackstone thought he was playing chess with an amateur. He had no idea he'd just walked into checkmate. The basement of St. Mary's Community Center had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Marcus looked around the circle of folding chairs at the faces of Richard Blackstone's victims, 12 people who had lost their homes, their life savings, or both to the developer's schemes. "My name is Marcus Rivera," he began, "and 3 days ago, they demolished my grandmother's house while I watched." Nods of recognition rippled through the group. These people knew that particular brand of helplessness. "But I didn't come here just to share my story. I came because I have something that can stop him." Marcus connected Mrs. Chen's flash drive to his laptop. The projector screen filled with financial records, email chains, and documented payoffs spanning 3 years. Gasps echoed through the basement as the scope of the corruption became clear. "Holy hell," whispered Tom Patterson, a grizzled veteran whose wife had lost her corner property 2 years ago. "That's why our appeals never went anywhere." 27 properties, Marcus said, clicking through the files. Nearly $4 million in artificially deflated sales. And it's all documented. An elderly woman in the front row raised her hand. "I'm Alina Vasquez. They took my mother's house last year. Claimed it was structurally unsound." Her voice hardened. "My mother built that house with her own hands in 1952. It was solid as a fortress." Marcus pulled up her file. "According to this, the structural engineer who condemned your house was paid $15,000 by Blackstone 3 days before the inspection." Alina's eyes blazed. "What do we do with this information?" "We don't just expose them," Marcus said. "We destroy them. But it has to be coordinated and it has to be devastating." Over the next 2 hours, they built their plan. Sarah Martinez explained the legal strategy. Multiple lawsuits filed simultaneously to overwhelm Blackstone's legal team and prevent them from buying their way out. The criminal evidence would go to the FBI and State Attorney General's office. But Marcus had something more personal in mind. "Blackstone is leveraged to the hilt," he explained, pointing to the financial documents. "All these properties he's flipping are mortgaged. His whole empire depends on completing his downtown development project on schedule. If that project gets delayed, his house of cards collapses." Tom finished with a grin. "Exactly. And according to these emails, he's planning to break ground next month. The demolition permits, the construction loans, everything is timed perfectly." Marcus smiled coldly. What if those permits suddenly disappeared into bureaucratic limbo? Alina leaned forward. You have someone inside City Hall? Better than that. I have someone who's tired of being on the wrong side. The next morning, Marcus sat across from Mrs. Chen in her small office, the smell of industrial coffee mixing with the tension in the air. You want me to delay the permits for the Riverside Development Project? She asked nervously. I don't want you to do your job properly for once, Marcus replied. When's the last time someone actually inspected those environmental impact reports, checked the traffic studies, verified the soil samples? Mrs. Chen's fingers drummed on her desk. It's been expedited. Right, so slow it down. Do the job the way it's supposed to be done. If the paperwork doesn't meet standards, send it back for corrections. If the studies look incomplete, require additional documentation. That could delay the project for months. Good. That afternoon, Marcus received a call from an unexpected source. This is Detective Angela Morrison, Financial Crimes Division. I understand you have information regarding Richard Blackstone and city corruption. How did you? Mrs. Chen contacted us. She's agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for immunity. We've been watching Blackstone for 2 years, but we couldn't get inside his operation. Morrison's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. Until now. What do you need from me? Everything. But more importantly, we need you to keep doing exactly what you're doing. Blackstone is going to get desperate when his permits get delayed. Desperate people make mistakes. As if on cue, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number. Playing games with city permits is a dangerous hobby. Some accidents can't be undone. Last warning. Marcus screenshot the message and forwarded it to Detective Morrison. Then he typed back, "Thanks for the threat. My lawyer will add it to the evidence file." His phone rang immediately. An unknown number. You think you're clever, don't you? Richard Blackstone's voice was tight with rage. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Marcus replied calmly. A small-time crook who got lucky for a few years. But luck runs out. I built this city. You stole from this city. You stole from elderly people who couldn't fight back. You stole from families who trusted the system. Marcus's voice hardened. But you made one mistake, Blackstone. You went after my grandmother's house. You went after my family. That old bat was a pain in my ass for years, just like you're becoming. Marcus smiled, knowing Detective Morrison was recording the call. Keep talking, Richard. You're making this easier than I expected. The line went dead. That evening, Marcus stood in the empty lot where his grandmother's house had been, holding a small potted plant, a cutting from her prized rosebush that had somehow survived the demolition. I promised you I'd take care of this place, Abuela, he whispered. Time to keep that promise. His phone buzzed with updates from the coalition. The lawsuits were ready to file. The FBI had opened an investigation. Detective Morrison had enough evidence to arrest Thompson and 3 other city officials. But the best news came from Mrs. Chen. Riverside Development permits officially under review. Estimated completion of review, 6 to 8 months. Sleep well tonight, Marcus. Justice is coming. Marcus planted the rosebush cutting in the soil where his grandmother's kitchen had once stood. Tomorrow the real battle would begin. But tonight, for the first time since the demolition, he felt something other than anger. He felt hope. The first domino fell at exactly 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning when Detective Morrison walked into Deputy Planning Director Thompson's office with handcuffs and a warrant. By noon, the local news was running footage of Thompson doing the perp walk, his face hidden behind a folder as reporters shouted questions about corruption and bribery. Marcus watched the coverage from Sarah Martinez's office, surrounded by boxes of legal documents. 12 separate lawsuits had been filed simultaneously that morning, each representing a different victim of Blackstone's scheme. The developer's legal team was scrambling, but they couldn't be everywhere at once. Phase 1 complete, Sarah said, hanging up her phone. Thompson's been denied bail. He's already asking about a plea deal. Marcus's phone buzzed with a call from Mrs. Chen. The permits office is chaos, she reported. 3 more officials were arrested an hour ago. The FBI is seizing computers and files. And Marcus? Her voice carried a note of satisfaction. Blackstone's Riverside Development permits have been officially suspended pending investigation. That afternoon, the second domino fell harder. Marcus stood outside Blackstone Development's gleaming downtown offices as FBI agents emerged carrying boxes of evidence. Through the lobby windows, he could see Richard Blackstone pacing frantically, his phone pressed to his ear. The banks are calling in his construction loans, Elena Vasquez said, joining Marcus on the sidewalk. At 73, she moved with the determined stride of someone who'd waited 2 years for this moment. My nephew works at First National, says Blackstone's been trying to get emergency meetings all morning. Good, Marcus replied. Let him sweat. The third domino was the most satisfying. That evening, Marcus received a call from Tom Patterson. "Turn on Channel 7, Tom said, barely containing his excitement. The news anchor's voice filled Marcus' apartment. Channel 7 has obtained exclusive documents revealing a systematic corruption scheme involving city officials and prominent developer Richard Blackstone. The evidence suggests that over 24 families lost their homes through fraudulent condemnation proceedings. The report included interviews with several coalition members, their faces no longer hiding behind shame but blazing with righteous anger. Elena Vasquez spoke directly to the camera. "They thought we were just old people who wouldn't fight back. They were wrong." Marcus's phone rang immediately. Richard Blackstone no longer trying to hide his desperation. "You son of a bitch," Blackstone snarled. "You have no idea what you've done. I have contracts, deadlines, investors." "Had," Marcus corrected calmly. "You cut those things. Past tense. This isn't over. I can make one phone call and have this whole thing buried. You think some small-time lawyer and a bunch of senior citizens can take me down? I think you're about to find out." Marcus smiled. "Oh, and Richard? Stop calling me. Detective Morrison is recording all your calls now. Every threat is another felony charge." The silence on the other end lasted for 10 seconds before Blackstone hung up. But a fourth domino was the one that truly broke Blackstone's empire. 3 days later, Marcus stood in the packed courtroom as Judge Patricia Hernandez read her decision on the emergency injunction. The evidence presented to this court reveals a pattern of systematic fraud, corruption, and abuse of public trust. Judge Hernandez declared, "All properties acquired by Blackstone Development through the fraudulent condemnation process are hereby frozen pending full investigation." Blackstone shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this will bankrupt me. I have legitimate investors, employees." "Mr. Blackstone," the judge interrupted, "you should have considered those consequences before you chose to steal from the citizens of this community. The injunction stands." Marcus felt Elena's hand squeeze his arm. Around the courtroom, members of their coalition sat with tears in their eyes. For the first time in years, justice felt possible. The final domino fell that Friday evening. Marcus was watering his grandmother's rosebush, now thriving in its new soil, and his phone rang. Detective Morrison's voice carried grim satisfaction. "It's over," she said. "Blackstone was arrested an hour ago. Federal charges, conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The DA is calling it the largest municipal corruption case in the state's history." "What about the other officials?" "7 arrests total. Thompson's already agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's giving us everything. Bank records, meeting recordings, the whole network." Marcus sat down on the steps of his temporary apartment, looking across the street at the empty lot where his grandmother's house had stood. "What happens to the properties now?" "Full restitution. Every family gets their property back plus damages. The city's already approved emergency funding for rebuilding." Morrison paused. "Marcus, there's something else. We found records showing Blackstone targeted your grandmother specifically. He knew she was documenting his activities. The demolition of your house wasn't just business, it was personal revenge." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling a mix of anger and vindication. His grandmother had been right to fear them, but she'd also been right to fight. "There's more," Morrison continued. "Blackstone's entire real estate portfolio is being liquidated. The court has ordered it sold at public auction, the proceeds going to victim compensation. Conservative estimates put the total restitution fund at $12 million. That night, Marcus called an emergency meeting of the coalition. They gathered again in Street Mary's basement, but this time the atmosphere was celebratory rather than conspiratorial. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, "Richard Blackstone will spend the next 15 to 20 years in federal prison. His empire is destroyed, his assets seized, and every single one of us is getting our properties back." The cheers echoed off the basement walls. Tom Patterson stood up, his weathered face beaming. "I've got something to say. 6 months ago, we were all..." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the kitchen of his grandmother's rebuilt house, the smell of fresh paint mixing with the aroma of tres leches cake baking in the oven. Through the window, he could see Elena Vasquez directing the construction crew working on her mother's house next door. The entire neighborhood had become a symphony of hammers, saws, and hope. "The frosting goes on after it cools completely," Marcus said into his phone, FaceTiming with his cousin Maria in California. "Abuelo was very specific about that." "I can't believe you found her recipe box in the rubble," Maria said, wiping tears from her eyes. "When can I visit the new house?" "Anytime. There's always room for family here." The house was nearly identical to the original, built from the architectural plans his great-grandfather had drawn in 1923, but with modern touches that honored both past and future. Solar panels gleamed on the roof, energy-efficient windows let in floods of natural light, and the foundation was reinforced to last another century. But the most important addition wasn't visible in the blueprints. In the basement, Marcus had created the Dolores Rivera Community Justice Center, a meeting space named after his grandmother, where residents could access legal aid, report suspicious activities, and organize against future threats. His doorbell chimed, and Marcus opened it to find Tom Patterson holding a bottle of champagne and a newspaper. "You need to see this," Tom said, his weathered face beaming. He spread the paper on Marcus's kitchen table. The headline read, "Blackstone sentenced 18 years in federal prison." Marcus scanned the article. Richard Blackstone had been convicted on 27 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The judge had called his scheme a systematic assault on the most vulnerable members of our community and imposed the maximum sentence. "There's more," Tom continued, flipping to the editorial page. "Look at this." The op-ed written by Detective Morrison was titled "How One Community Fought Back and Won." It detailed the investigation and praised the coalition's courage in exposing corruption that had operated for years. "We become famous," Tom chuckled. "Sarah Martinez has been getting calls from communities across the state asking for help with similar problems." Marcus nodded. Sarah had already started the Rivera Coalition model, a template other neighborhoods could use to organize against predatory developers and corrupt officials. It included Marcus's grandmother's documentation methods, legal strategies, and community organizing tactics. Speaking of Sarah, Marcus said she should be here any minute for the ribbon cutting. As if summoned, Sarah Martinez appeared at the door carrying a clipboard and wearing her biggest smile. Ready for the grand opening. The three of them walk outside, where a small crowd had gathered on Maple Street. The entire coalition was there, along with neighbors, city officials, the honest ones, and local media. Mrs. Chen stood near the front, holding a giant pair of ceremonial scissors. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying across the crowd, "8 months ago, they demolished my grandmother's house, thinking they could erase her legacy and intimidate this community into silence." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. But they underestimated something fundamental about this neighborhood. When you attack one of us, you attack all of us. When you try to destroy our homes, you only make us stronger. Elena Vasquez stepped forward. "Marcus, your grandmother would be so proud. You didn't just rebuild a house. You rebuilt hope." Mrs. Chen approached with the scissors. "Before we cut this ribbon, I want to say something. For 3 years, I enabled corruption because I was afraid. Marcus and his grandmother taught me that being afraid of doing the right thing is worse than any consequence of actually doing it." Her voice strengthened. "I have been promoted to Deputy Planning Director, replacing Thompson, and I promise you this community will never again be betrayed by its own government." The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus took the scissors and looked at the red ribbon stretched across his front porch. But before he cut it, he noticed something that made his heart skip. A familiar figure stood at the back of the crowd, Richard Blackstone's former assistant, who had testified against her boss during the trial. She approached nervously. "Mr. Rivera, I'm Jennifer Walsh. I worked for Blackstone for 2 years. I want you to know, I tried to warn people, but I was scared of losing my job." Marcus studied her face. "What do you want to say?" "I'm sorry for all of it, for not speaking up sooner, for letting it go on as long as it did." She pulled out an envelope. "I found this in Blackstone's files after he was arrested. It's about your grandmother." Marcus opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten note from Blackstone to Thompson. "The old woman at 847 Maple is getting too close. Speed up the condemnation process. Make an example of her property that others will remember." The crowd fell silent as Marcus read the note aloud. When he finished, his voice was steady, but his eyes blazed with renewed anger. "They thought destroying her house would be her ending," he said. "Instead, it was their beginning of the end." He raised the scissors high. "This isn't just a house warming. This is a promise. To my grandmother, to this community, and to anyone who thinks they can prey on decent people. We're watching. We're organized, and we're not going anywhere." The scissors cut through the ribbon, and the crowd cheered. As people filed into the house to tour the rebuilt rooms and sample Tres Leches cake, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. "Your grandmother is smiling down on you today," Elena said softly. "I hope so, but I think she'd also be making plans for what comes next." "What comes next?" Marcus gestured toward the basement stairs where a sign read Community Justice Center, open to all. "We've got 17 other communities that have contacted us for help. Blackstone's in prison, but there are dozens of others just like him operating in other cities." Elena's eyes lit up with the same fire that had driven their fight. "So we teach them what we learned here." "Exactly. My grandmother always said that justice isn't a destination, it's a journey, and this neighborhood is just the first stop." That evening, as the last visitors left and the dishes were cleaned, Marcus sat alone in his grandmother's rebuilt kitchen. The recipe box sat open on the counter, filled with index cards that held more than cooking instructions. They held a legacy of caring for community, fighting for what's right, and never giving up. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Morrison. Saw the news coverage of your ribbon cutting. The FBI wants to discuss your coalition model for a national anti-corruption program. Interested? Marcus smiled and typed back, absolutely. But we meet here in the Community Justice Center. If they want to learn from us, they come to where the real work happens. Outside, snow was falling again, but this time it felt like a blessing rather than a challenge. The house was warm, the neighborhood was safe, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sound of hammers as another family rebuilt their stolen dreams. Marcus opened his grandmother's recipe box and pulled out a fresh index card. At the top, he wrote, "Recipe for Justice. Serves everyone." Below that, he began writing the ingredients they discovered. 1 part courage, 2 parts community, a generous helping of persistence, and just enough righteous anger to fuel a fight. The recipe was complete, but the cooking would never end. And that was exactly how his grandmother would have wanted it.